one's actually dropped in yet, David. So, because I just made it live now on the minute, so I anticipate people dropping in now. Actually, we do have people arriving. Hello, everyone. Before we start off, we might wait about, say, 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 5, to allow everyone who is joining us to join. Because even though it's online and everyone's at home, things can happen. So we'll just give the workshop about 5 minutes before we start. So again, thank you for coming along, and we'll be starting soon. I see some familiar names there. Nice to see you guys again. Okay, I think we should be able to start very soon. I think we might have a critical mass to start. Okay, so all right, well, seeing as I think we're about 10, and I think that should be enough to start the webinar now. So what I'll do, I'll kick off. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming along to Ku-ring-gai Council's Greywater know-how presentation. This presentation is part of the Water Smart program we have at Ku-ring-gai Council. So, as many of you know, the recent case of community transmission of the COVID-19 virus has meant that we've had to convert this into a fully online presentation. So, I'd like to say thank you to the members who are attending tonight for agreeing to participate online as opposed to being face-to-face, participating in a face-to-face format. This was going to be a face-to-face and Zoom presentation, but as I mentioned, COVID-19 has meant that we've had to convert to a 100% Zoom presentation. So thank you very much for joining us on Zoom. So presenting tonight is environmental engineer David Knights. David has been running water sustainability workshops for Ku-ring-gai Council and other councils across Sydney for the last 15 years. So he's very experienced in this field, and I'm sure some of you attending have already been to some of his previous presentations on rainwater tanks or rain gardens. And as you know, he's very highly qualified and knows what he's talking about. And tonight's presentation will be no different. And I myself, I'm looking forward to this. I'm quite interested in this topic. And so if you have any questions, if you have any technical questions, please submit questions via the chat window. I think we have 2 already. And if you have any questions regarding David's presentation itself, please submit those questions via the Q&A box, which should be on your screen at the bottom of the screen. So without further delay, I'd like to please welcome David Knights, who will now present to you his presentation on greywater reuse. Over to you, David. And okay, David, take yourself off mute.
Yes, sorry, I was just trying to work out where the button was. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you just fine.
And can you see the screen okay?
Yep, I can see the screen. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, James. Thanks for the introduction, and hello, everyone. I always feel slightly ethereal giving these presentations because yeah, I can't see anyone, and I just assume that there are people out there. So please do submit questions if you got stuff through. One of the unfortunate things I think about these online presentations is you miss a bit of that direct feedback straight away that you can in a real person presentation. So please do submit questions, and James will interrupt me with questions as we go along. So that just stops me from rambling at times too. So I'm going to just talk about Greywater tonight, and how to reuse it, when to reuse it, what it's best for. And I'll just give you a quick overview of the presentation that I've got organised. But as I said, by all means, submit questions, and if you've got specific things or specific things you want to know about, by all means, ask. So the overview that I've got, what I've got prepared is water use in the home, and that's important for setting up how we use Greywater. So just a quick introduction to where we use water, and then out of that, which bits are Greywater, what actually it is, and then the basics of Greywater in terms of just the treatment systems, all the different types of treatment systems, simple ways all the way through to more complex ways, and then finishing up with some of the things around the legislation and regulations around Greywater. Okay, so I'm going to start just with some basics about how we use water in the home, because as Greywater reuse is really all about doing two things. It's about minimising the amount of wastewater going into our sewage systems, and in Ku-ring-gai, they basically go into predominantly our local creeks. So the more wastewater that we can actually keep out of the sewer, the more it keeps out of our local creeks. And then the second thing is it saves water, obviously. So anything that we can substitute from using potable water and using that with a locally sourced water, we save on the amount of water that we take from Sydney Water's dams and in periods of drought from desalination. So it actually helps preserve and conserve our water supplies. So they're the kind of the two key real drivers for using Greywater. And if we just look at this pie chart here, you can see these are the different things, and the numbers there, you can ignore the first number for those of you interested. That first number is about the amount of typical litres per day for a standard household. But if you look at this, the number that's really important there is the percentage number. So you can see that basically we use water, and it's split typically across kind of 3 or 4 main uses, which is the shower and bath, clothes, washing, and garden. And then we've kind of got a whole bunch of other uses like the toilet, dishwasher, and tap, which make up a final quarter. Toilets, we used to use a lot more for toilets, but now we've got really water efficient toilets. Most people have dual flush toilets. We don't actually use that much in toilets these days. You know, certainly compared to 20 odd years ago, we probably used more like 25 to 30% of water in toilets. But we've really saved a lot of water just by using water efficient toilets. And so this will vary. This is a typical household. This will really vary depending on your circumstance. So one thing that's not in here is if you've got one of these, if you've got a pool, you'll find that about 20% of your water can typically can be pool top-up water. It's basically like a big area of irrigation. You're losing water from evaporation. If you have a pool cover, that's really good at saving water, but you'll use just a bit of water, quite a bit of water for your pool. So that's one thing that can vary from the norm. And then the other thing that really varies from the norm is the amount of irrigation. If you've got lots of turf area or high demand irrigation, veggies, high water use gardens, you will also tend to use a lot more water on the garden because that's probably the big key variable, and it's really seasonal water use for the garden. So those numbers I showed you were for the typical house. The typical water use that we use indoors doesn't change too much. Unless you've got teenagers who love having long showers or things like that, or teenagers who also just love chucking one thing in the washing machine and washing one thing at a time, you'll tend to find that indoors tends to be pretty consistent across most households, and it just varies with the number of people. So if you've got 2 people in the house, then you won't use as much as 4 people. Just by standing, 4 people having a shower will generate that much more than 2 people. So if we look at that, what is Greywater? So if you think of that pie chart that I showed, this is kind of just another way of showing that, just a little schematic. So Greywater, we talk about Greywater, and it's kind of really 3 things. It's the bath/shower, so it's that personal washing water. It's the clothes washing or the laundry, and your taps. And it's not, we don't really consider kitchen to be grey water. Like you often might hear that confused, but we generally don't call kitchen grey water because it's got a lot more things like oil, it's got a lot more soaps, and it's got a lot more organics, so all the food waste that goes down your sink. So generally we wouldn't recommend trying to reuse the water from the kitchen. And the reason for that is that, yeah, the bath water and your laundry, they tend to be mostly water, really, like what's in them. And then you put a little bit of soap or shampoo or things like that in it. They don't have any of the organics, the solids that come out of your kitchen tap or your toilet. So, and the reason for that is, the reason why we like to keep it as what we call the light grey water, is that's pretty good quality. It's certainly not something you would ever want to drink, but it is something that doesn't have a lot of pathogens in it. It doesn't have a lot of the things that can cause health risks. And it doesn't have a lot of things, even just practically, that causes clogging in irrigation systems or things like that. So we kind of separate it out. And the reason for that is, as I said, in that pie chart that I showed you, the taps and the toilets are actually not a huge part of the water demands and also the water generation. If you take the laundry in the bathroom, you're getting about 50% of your water in your house for a standard house. So you're actually getting most of the water just by taking, say, laundry and bathroom. So you don't really need to take the kitchen tap. It's not a lot of water, and it's certainly much dirtier. And so why would we want to reuse grey water? I touched on this. A couple of other things that it's really good. And I touched on the drinking water side and saving drinking water. And I also touched on the importance of reducing the loads to the wastewater system. But one of the great things that it can do is, grey water is really probably the best way to get a drought-proof supply of water for irrigation. And so unlike rainwater tanks, if you've got high areas of irrigation and you've got, you want to keep that garden or veggies or lawn in a really good condition, rainwater can meet it for some of the time, but then obviously during a hot, dry period when you've got lots of water going out for irrigation in summer, eventually your tank's going to empty out. And that may be, 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how big your rainwater tank is and how much roof area you're directing to it. But at some point that rainwater tank's going to run out and you're still going to have hot, dry days. So we can go, often in January, we can go for 4 weeks without any real rainfall. We might get a few mils here and there, but you basically can be, have irrigation demand for that time. So unlike a rainwater tank, grey water basically is there every day. You're having your shower, you're washing your clothes, consistently. There's always a source of grey water, whereas eventually rainwater will run out. And so, why do we use grey water why do we use grey water as opposed to wastewater? Because it's low in pollutants, much safer and easier, and generally it's got enough. There's enough grey water to use. You don't need to go to the extra distance to treating wastewater to get that good quality water or better quality water for reuse. So it's much safer than trying to take all of the wastewater or the kitchen and the water from the toilet, for example. So you get high volumes and you get reasonably good quality of water for reuse. And that's why we recommend generally using grey water first, particularly for irrigation. And so this is just another way of showing that in terms of the grey water setup. This is just looking at the indoors now. I've taken out the irrigation and things like that. And you can see in this chart, for a typical house on a typical basis, most of the water, this is again, those numbers are litres per day. You can see that most of that's coming from the shower and also from the washing machine. So you're getting most of that water by taking what we call the light grey water. So even though grey water is generally of a reasonable quality, it is not 100% just pure water. There's things in there, and there's pathogens. So you have it, particularly if you've got young kids. You'll know you'll get more pathogens. You'll get classic things like dirt, hair, lint, etc. The hair and lint, even though they don't sound like much, they're actually not great for clogging. So they can be quite problematic for just clogging irrigation systems and clogging pumps and things like that. So they can actually be, even though there's not a lot of it in there, they can actually be problematic. Depending on what you use for your materials, your soaps and stuff like that, you can have some salts in there, which are important. just in terms of reusing it for irrigation. They can have impacts on the soil. And then, sorry, I'm just checking it. You still there, James?
I'm still here, David. Yes.
Great. Sorry, I just lost the picture of you, so I just want to check you're still there. Yep, great. Okay, yep. So, and then you can get, so certainly for some material, like some of the products, so particularly for laundry machine products, they can be really high in salt because one of the things they use is a sodium-based chemical in there. And what happens is the sodium dissolves in the water. It's meant to do that. That's how the washing powders dissolve. And what you get left with is high sodium water. And what if that goes out into the garden, that can replace the good cations on your soil, the calcium and magnesium which the plants need to grow and help keep your good soil structure. Replace that with sodium, and you get this slow deterioration of your soil. So if you're taking laundry in particular, it's not so much of an issue for your shower, but if you're taking laundry, you really want to use low sodium based clothes washing powders and liquids. And there's, I'll talk a little bit more about that, about ways to find out what are good products to use. And then obviously if you're cleaning, if you're cleaning, say for example your shower or your bath, you sometimes you might use a little bit of bleach or whatever cleaning products you're using. Depending on what your Greywater system is, if that's connected into it, you're going to get some of these, cleaning products, which again are not great to put out directly, say for example into irrigation. You don't want to put bleach directly onto your lawn. So you need to just think about, when you're cleaning, how if that's connected to your Greywater system, what's the impact of that? So if we think about how is it best to use Greywater, it's really the best use for Greywater is for irrigation. It's the simplest way to reuse Greywater. It's the best match of a constant supply to a climate-dependent source. Greywater is better than rainwater tanks, as I mentioned before, because they're more reliable, they're drought-proof. And to get it to Greywater to get into the house, you require so for example, for reusing for toilets or even clothes washing, and reusing the Greywater that way, you require high levels of treatment. And so we generally find it's better and more cost effective to use rainwater tanks for saving water in the house. So say for example, connecting your rainwater tank into plumbing for your toilet flushing, your clothes washing, your laundry, and also even your hot water. Is all better for using rainwater tanks because it's basically a really good quality supply. It doesn't generally it has very low levels of pathogens generally, whereas Greywater, to get it to that level to reuse requires some substantial treatment. So I'm going to talk about the difference between different treatment systems in Greywater. So you can do it. It just tends to be more expensive than rainwater tanks to get that internal use. And then the other place that Greywater is really, a good way to consider use is for any house that's off the grid or considering going off the grid. Having Greywater separated out from wastewater gives you some options in terms of just the way to dispose that, a really simple, easy way to dispose it without having substantial treatment. And then the other option where Greywater is really good is where space is limited. So for example, if you need a large rainwater tank, a Greywater system can be a relatively compact system compared to a rainwater tank. So if you're really space limited, and sometimes that might occur, for example, in some townhouses or smaller dwellings, small multi-dwelling apartments. So again, where you're space limited, Greywater tends to be better. So one thing that is, if you can work out, so you might be wondering how much water do I actually use in my garden. You might not actually really be aware of that. There's a couple of different ways. If you've got bills for going back a number of years, particularly if they're online these days, you can go back and you can actually plot it like this. These are just the quarterly bills. This is actually from my parents-in-law's house in Canberra. They have a big Canberra classic quarter-acre block, lots of turf, and they use quite a bit here, which you can see. So all I've done is I've just plotted their bills for the quarters, and that's the autumn, summer, spring, winter, etc. and that goes back, for 3 years. And you can see there that there's this seasonal pattern where they're irrigating in summer and spring, and they're not really irrigating that much in the winter and autumn when it's cold, particularly in Canberra. So what you can do is you can kind of pick the lowest point, and you can kind of see that lowest bar, that lowest chart there, and I've drawn a green line across that. And I've kind of said, oh, well, just as a first cut, I can kind of estimate that if this is generally all in internal use, I've taken this lowest point here and assumed that there was no irrigation then. And then I've said everything above that line is irrigation. And then just worked out, okay, if I just subtract 18 from 8, then there was about 10 kiloliters per quarter of irrigation. And in this one here, it was only about 1 kiloliter per quarter. If you do that for each period, you can kind of get an estimation of, out of this, it might have been, looks like it was more like 30% of their total water use was irrigation. So that's really important, because that says, okay, well, if I'm using that much, you can then work out, okay, internally, roughly what percentage of your internal amount do you need to match up to that external irrigation demand. And so you can kind of get a rough, quick feel just by looking at your water bills for how much irrigation and how much grey water you're going to generate. So for this house, you can see that basically you've got generally say about 8 kiloliters. If we say roughly 50% of that is grey water, you're getting 4 kiloliters of grey water per quarter. And at their peak times, they're getting up to 8 kiloliters per quarter of irrigation demand. So even grey water is, in this particular case, is not going to meet these really dry periods. It's going to meet most of it, but up until this point here, at about 12 kiloliters per quarter, you're actually not going to have enough grey water to even meet these high irrigation demands. But you can see how much you're going to use generally. And the other way to quickly check it is just to take your own meter readings. When you're irrigating, obviously probably not irrigating at the moment. It's cooler. We're coming into the cooler months. But what you can do is, if you put your irrigation system on at a particular time, you can go out and read your meter, and you can just see how much. If you run it generally for half an hour, or you might run it for an hour front and back, or whatever it is, and you can actually just take a meter reading. So you go out and take it at the beginning of your period of running the irrigation, and at the end, and do it in a period when nobody else is using much water in their house. If you're running a tap or anything like that, it's okay, but take it when you're not doing clothes washing or something like that, and you can literally just read your meter, and that will tell you exactly. And this number here is your kiloliters, and this tells you your 0.1 kiloliters here. So you can read that if it goes from this will change from 52, and this number will go around, and you can see this will go around from say 0.1 to say 0.4, and that will tell you that you've used about 300 litres on the irrigation, or 0.3 kilolitres. So you can read it directly from the meter, and then if you know how often you irrigate, you can then work out roughly, if you irrigate 3 times a week, you can roughly work out how much water you're using on irrigation. So I've talked to this, so rainwater tanks. I've talked to how rainwater tanks are really best for using for internal because of the water quality, cheaper cost. They generally, even though they don't meet all of the supply for internal, a well set up rainwater system can meet about, depending on what you plumb it into, but it can generally meet about 70 to 80% of your internal demands. And it won't meet it all the time, but you'll meet it for most of the time, even for a relatively small tank. And the good thing about rainwater tanks is they generally are pretty low running costs as well. They're low, they're kind of like solar panels. You don't need to do a lot to keep a rainwater tank running. Every now and again, you might need to replace the pump. You might need to empty out the first flush diverter, but they're relatively low maintenance. So what can grey water be reused for? Grey water can be reused for subsoil irrigation or subsurface irrigation without any treatment. So what that means is you can take your water from the shower and put it directly into a subsurface irrigation. And what this is showing in this picture here is what I call an Aggie pipe, or basically a pipe with holes in it that water comes and leaks out of that. And if that, as long as that's not on the surface and not running off anywhere and causing ponding or anything on the surface, you don't need to do any treatment of the grey water sources. It can basically just soak away into your garden. But then for any other use, so for surface spray irrigation, so for sprinkler systems that pop up and throw water onto the surface, they need treatment just because of the higher health risk for that. And then if you're going to reuse it for toilet flushing, so internal uses, toilet flushing or in the washing machine, they need to be treated quite well. They need to basically have really like a mini treatment plant in your backyard. And I'll show you some examples of both of these, how you can do that. And it's related to risk, and these are regulated requirements. They're set by New South Wales Health, and New South Wales is relatively strict about what you can and can't do, and what devices you can and can't do. And they've set those on a relatively conservative basis in terms of the way that they've set them up, but they've done it for general protection of public health. So can grey water be stored? If you're doing the first situation where you're basically just taking grey water and not treating it and using it for subsurface irrigation, it can't be stored. You basically have to use it from straight away, and the legal definition is within more than 24 hours. But that basically means you can't store it at all. You've got to basically just push it out into the system. So that means that basically when you wash your clothes or you have your shower, it's basically got to go straight out to the irrigation system. And that's because, and you'll see this if you're interested in this, I just recommend doing a simple bucket test, just to see, even with your shower water, which, as I said, is mostly, if you think about your shower, you're generally relatively clean. You're not, most of the time you don't have, you're not covered in dirt or anything like that. You don't have many organics. You're not covered in leaf litter or anything like that. All that's going into that is soap, maybe a bit of shampoo if you're washing your hair. But you just put that, even just the water that's running off your body and straight into the say, for example, you're putting it into a bath and just capturing that water. It's amazing how much just even that water will deteriorate over time. You'll start to get what we call biofilms or slime growing on the inside of the bucket. And in warm weather, that will occur within 2 to 3 days. And so what happens is also the pathogens can increase in there. So the pathogens grow inside that grey water. And over time, that water quality just gets worse. It will actually, if you leave it long enough, it will actually start to stink. And so that's the reason why you don't store the grey water. It's got to be pushed out straight to that irrigation because it does deteriorate. And those biofilms are problematic, not just for the odor, but they actually start to clog your irrigation system. So you also don't want to do it to protect your own irrigation system. And that's really important because if I just go back to these, the Aggie pipe at the bottom there, they have small little holes. So if you're leaving that with water sitting in there for long periods or high biofilms, it will clog the little holes in that subsurface irrigation system, and that becomes a bit of a maintenance headache. So generally, health recommends public health for you want to minimise contact with grey water, which is why they've stipulated that it has to be subsurface without treatment, and surface ponding of grey water. And that just means if you put your irrigation system on, you leave it on too long, you'll get ponding on your lawn or your garden bed. That's what that surface ponding refers to. And that's bad for a couple of reasons. If that ponding stays there for a long amount of time, it's perfect for mozzie breeding. And it's also perfect, again, for just this deterioration of the water quality. And then if somebody does come into contact with that, potential risk to the health. Mostly in your case, it's your own health, but generally New South Wales Health is also concerned about people who might be coming into contact with that, particularly those who are vulnerable, young children, etc., who may come over to somebody's house and they're thinking about preventing general public health to everyone, including people who may visit your house who may not know that you're necessarily using grey water. And then there's also this issue of you can't just, if you're doing it to subsurface, you need to be really careful. What can be really easy to do is kind of this set and forget mentality. You kind of just have the system, your grey water diversion device, which I'll talk about, running, and it can actually push out too much grey water out into your backyard, your subsurface irrigation system. And what it can do is it can basically just be running out so much that it's actually starting to flow back out.
David,
and start to run off. And so you've got to be really careful. You actually don't put out too much.
So David, we have sorry for interrupting, but we have a bit of a question from Deb Watson. The question is from Deb. I think it goes a little bit back to the discussion about rainwater tanks. What is the advice on using rainwater tanks on children's playgrounds and in sandpits?
So rainwater tanks for children's playgrounds and in sandpits. That was that the question, Jay?
Yeah, that's the question. Yeah.
And is that I'm for general wetting? Like rainwater is of a reasonably high quality. So if you're just wetting down the sand, for example, in that playground, or you're having it as a bit of water play in that playground, it's generally okay. But obviously, if you know with children, the key risk is that rainwater does have some pathogens in it. And so children in particular are notorious for, touching stuff, putting it in their mouth. And so, you just have to be mindful of the fact that, yeah, there is pathogens in there, and particularly with young children, they can just go straight into it. They can start drinking it all from their hands into their mouth. So there is a small risk there of kids ingesting pathogens, getting, effectively a tummy bug. It's not just a huge issue, but that's effectively the risk that is there. It's not with rainwater tanks. Nothing is prohibited. You can actually, even in urban areas, rainwater. It's actually legal to use rainwater for drinking water. So rainwater is considered of a reasonable quality that you can use it for anything.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much for that, David. Actually, on those kind of questions that are not directly related to greywater, I might address those at the end of the presentation. But if it's about greywater, I'll speak up and ask those questions for everyone. All right, thanks for that, David.
And then a couple of other things is just like if you're putting it out, greywater out for irrigation, you generally don't put it out when it's raining, and the reason for that is that if it's raining, the soils are already quite wet. There's much more likelihood of, with the soils being saturated, the grey water coming back up to the surface and then running off. And in particular, if you've got that, say for example, in a sloping block which slopes into your neighbour's property, you really don't want lots of, really big rainfall event, lots of grey water mixing with the rainwater and running onto your neighbour's property, or even in your own property. So you just have to be careful. And really what that is it's like using irrigation system carefully. You just don't, you want to use it so that you're generally applying the grey water to dry soils, and it's not causing really, really wet soils that causes grey water to come to the surface and run off. That's generally it. So if you don't see that grey water coming to the surface, you're generally doing the right thing. There's nothing particularly difficult about it. It's just using a bit of common sense, really. You can use it for using it for gardens which have edible gardens, so veggie gardens, and it can be really good for that. But the main thing that you just need to just consider is that, yeah, there's potential pathogens in grey water, so that if you're using it for any edible plants, you just want to make sure that if you're consuming it raw, they're really well washed, and try and avoid it if you can, but just wash those. So you just general hygiene practices. And I've mentioned this, greywater safe products, particularly laundry powders. And if you go to Landfax Labs, they have a website with greywater friendly products. Earth Care has a little greywater tick. And if you like reading labels, you can really see it. Compare a couple of them. Those that have sodium based products, you'll see it in the greywater friendly ones. They tend not to use sodium compounds in their powders or their liquids, and you'll see that as it comes through if you start to read the label. Sodium tends to be the first product that you'll see in these systems. So yeah, so you generally, particularly if you're using it a lot for, particularly in a hot, dry summer, and you're putting lots of grey water out, you can really cause substantial deterioration to your soils quite quickly if you're using a particularly unfriendly product. Okay, so I'm just going to talk now. So I've talked about just the general basics, there's just the general kind of rules around reusing grey water, the public health side of things. And I think we're all thinking about public health now because of the current kind of situation we've been in. We've been forced to really think about public health and all those kind of basic measures. So that kind of just sets the framework for doing the right thing with grey water and setting the framework for why. And so now I'm going to talk about the different ways. And I'm going to step up those in terms of it's kind of like a different scales. So the first things I'm going to talk about are really simple, cheap ways to use grey water, and they're actually very labor intensive. So as we kind of go through these systems, you'll note the cost goes up, the capital cost goes up, but the actual labor, your own labor goes down. So you can kind of, pick your own kind of preference for where you want to be. But that's generally the way it's set it up. So it's going from the low cost, high labor through to the low labor, high cost options. So the very first one to use is just a bucket. So you can basically put a bucket in the shower. If you've got a shower that is in a bathtub, you can just put the bath, and which is what I do at times. I just basically put the bath plug in, and I fill up that, and then I just go and bucket out the water to the garden. I just irrigate the garden like that. Really simple, it takes about 10, 15 minutes of just bucketing it out into the garden. The next step up from that is the siphon, and I've used this a lot, particularly in hot summers when I get bored of bucketing it out, and I actually want to put a lot of water out to the garden. And this is good if you've got a bath. It doesn't really work with a shower, but if you've got a bath or a shower that's connected to the bath, what you can do is you can basically put the plug in, and you can see this is just a hose. So you put one end of the hose in the bath, and then you hold it down. So you can see that's what that little stool is doing. It's just holding the hose down into the water. And then you charge the other end of the hose with a tap. So you just connect it to the tap, and then fill up that water so the water starts to come out to the bath. As soon as it starts coming out of the bath, you turn off the tap, and then that line is now charged. You've now got a siphon line, and then you can take that out into the garden wherever you like, and it'll just dribble out into the garden. It comes out very slowly, and obviously it needs to be below your point. So you can't have the bit that's going out into the garden going uphill. But if your bath is set up high and you've got a garden down the back, it will just generally trickle out to the garden out the back, and it'll just run out. And then it'll basically empty out. You won't be able to you'll leave a little bit of water back in the bath. You just won't be able to suck it all out. And you need to be really careful. I've done this myself. If you don't actually weight down the hose properly at the bath end, you'll soon have water pouring out on the floor in your bathroom. So you want to avoid that. So carefully weight that down. But a really simple way, takes about 5 minutes to set up, but you can quickly get 50 liters of water. Or if your kids like mine and like filling the bath up to complete full, you'll get 150 liters out onto the garden.
David, we have a question. The question from Michael is, does grey water need to be treated for non-spray surface irrigation? So for example, drip irrigation. And are there any restrictions on using grey water near natural water bodies, such as creeks?
Yeah, good question. So the first one is, no. So the first one is you don't need to treat it and for subsurface drip irrigation. So that's what I was saying about the drip irrigation. You definitely don't need to treat it for that. But you can't store it. You've got to basically put it straight out to the subsurface irrigation system. And in terms of regulations around creeks, generally there's you generally abide by the buffer rule. There's a range of buffers, and it varies depending on what the system is. But as a general rule of thumb, like if you're near a creek, you generally want to be about 20 meters from the buffer is the safe. Depending on where you are, you potentially can be closer than that, but as a general rule of thumb, you want to be at least 20 meters away from the creek, for the very good reason that if you didn't, and you've got rocky soils, or the soils that basically the grey water could just run over the surface and directly into the creek, that's what that rule is about, trying to protect, so that you don't put too much grey water out there, it just ends up directly into the creek. And that 20-meter rule is basically just making sure that there's enough soil to infiltrate into before it gets to the creek, so that it's treated basically as it's flowing through the soil. Generally, as I was saying at the thing, it's about not applying too much. Even if general common sense is don't apply too much grey water to your soil if it's going out, because that's what causes the issues with the creek or the sensitive receiving water, if it's a wetland or a lake, a coastal lake, if you're near one of those.
Great. Thank you very much for that, David. That's a great answer. Thanks.
Okay, so the next one is I call this the space saver. So these were, if any of you've been to Japan, Tokyo, Kobe, any of those big cities, Osaka, you might have come across these. And in Japan, these were really kind of used for really efficient small apartments where they didn't actually want to put in a separate sink, and they went, oh, what a great idea, we'll just put the sink on top of the cistern for the toilet. And so when you washed your hands after you went to the toilet, you basically filled back up the toilet, as well as having mains water coming in, but any water from the from washing your hands, just went straight into the system. And about 20 years later, they started coming into Australia, these things. So now you can actually see this, all the standard brands, Coroma, etc., now have one of these systems. And they're just a really simple little way of reusing grey water. And again, great space saver. So, useful for your second toilet, where you may just have that, you may not have a separate kind of bathroom associated with that. I wouldn't rush out and replace all your toilets with this. But if you're thinking about, replacing a toilet that's, past its use by date, or you're doing a renovation, something like this, I definitely think is well worth, considering. I think they're pretty neat. Okay, so they're some quite simple things you can do, quite manual in the siphoning and the bucket, but pretty cheap. Now I'm going to talk about the next step up, and these devices generally cost around about $500 to dollars you can get. They vary depending on the product, but they're around about $500, and they generally cost around about $500 to install. And these grey water diversion devices, so they typically cost. You can definitely probably get it cheaper system than that, and you can probably spend a little bit more, but the average price would be about $1,000 for something like this grey water diversion device. And I should say, actually, I'll step up before I talk to those devices. I'll just quickly talk about just these, a really simple device, which is about $50, so a simple gravity diversion device. And so what these are is, I'll just flip to this image and I'll come back to that one. These are these manual, and you get these in your hardware stores. These are these little Nilex diverters, and what they do is, say for example, they connect to your washing machine outlet that comes out typically into the laundry tub, and you install it on the tub. And what it has is, it basically just has one inlet, which is the inlet at the top that you see there, and then it has two outlets, and you open and close that little lever there, and when it's open, it goes out to your grey water irrigation device, so just out to your subsoil system, so whether that's drip irrigation or an Aggie pipe system. And then so you can basically be running the washing machine and go, yeah, actually I'll put this washing machine. You can get the rinse water, and you can get the rinse water, and you can just send that rinse water out to irrigate, whatever it is, the lawn, the garden, the veggies, etc. And it's manual. You have to do it manual. So you go out there, you flip it over, and you got to remember to flip it back when you do at the end of it, so it goes back to sewer normally. And that's just a really simple thing. And these cost about, I don't know, I haven't checked recently, but they're about $20 to $30 from memory. And then, it's pretty simple install. And again, technically you need a plumber to do this. Whenever you're working with sewer, anything that goes back to sewer, legally you're required to get a licensed plumber to make these changes. And so this just shows what it does just in a section. I'll just go back to the other slide. And so this just shows it all together. Can you see my mouse there?
Yes, I can see the mouse, yes.
Okay, good. There, so this is one that's just showing it from a sink, but it could be a number of different devices. If you can get under the house, it could even be your bath or your shower or your laundry. What this is showing is this is this line, and it's only this line. You've got to make sure that it's nothing else is connected to where you put this device in. Like, you don't want to connect this line, which also has your kitchen tap going to it, for example. So you need to be, that's why, again, you just need that plumber just to make sure you're not putting it on something that you don't think is there, or even worse, your toilet line going out to this. And so you just basically, this diverter, you flip it open and it goes out to the subsoil irrigation system, to your plants here. And then when you've done that and you finish and you don't want it to, or it's raining and you don't want it to go out to the garden anymore, you flip it back the other way and it goes back out to the sewer system. So simple as that. And it's very manual. And there's a bunch of approved devices. There's just some examples there. But again, yeah, you'll see these in your hardware stores. They're reasonably common. Yep. So the next step up is, and those systems, so this is the one I was talking about before I jumped the gun. I was talking about the ones that are about $500 to purchase and about $500 to install. These are diversion devices, and they typically are pumped. And what they do is they take it, and you can see this set up here with the washing machine, the laundry, comes out, you have that laundry outlet coming into this device, and I'll show you a close-up of what that device looks like in a minute. But this is basically just a little box that has a pump in it and a little filter. And what happens is water firstly goes through the little filter, and then it goes into the little box, which really just stores not much water, but about a couple of buckets worth, maybe 20, 30 liters of water. And that just fills up. And then when it gets to a certain point, if it's triggered to go out to the irrigation system, if you've set it to basically pump out, it will then just pump out that water out to the irrigation system. And it will just keep pumping effectively until, again, it's manual. You basically turn it off again. It basically says, okay, water comes in. Am I going out to the irrigation? Am I set to pump out to the irrigation system? Yes, pumps out to the irrigation system, and then it has an overflow. So if there's too much water coming in here and it's too much for the pump, it'll overflow back to the wastewater. Or if you've got the situation where you've turned it off, it'll basically just flow out to wastewater directly, and it'll just bypass this whole system. It won't pump out if you've turned it off. And so what that does is that basically, as mentioned before, that this is less labor. So basically, you don't have to go manually flick a switch. You can have the switch internally. You can flip the switch, turn it on, and it pumps out to Greywater, or flip it off. It doesn't. It goes directly to sewer. And you're spending a little bit more money, but you're basically saving a bit of your time, getting a more sophisticated system. And you can see here, this system is showing this is drip irrigation going out into the garden. Generally, we generally don't recommend using drip irrigation for turf, just because it doesn't wet enough area. There is systems out there called KISS, which actually have this geotextile layer that it wicks out across the surface. So if you really want to put a subsurface out into the lawn, drip irrigation is not that great. It just you have to put too many little drippers out there to get it out to the turf. So dripper is really only good for gardens and for veggies. It's not great for lawn, except for the KISS system. And these are a bunch of different devices, and you need these to be installed by a licensed plumber, and you need to install, New South Wales stipulates there needs to be a watermarked system, which is a national system, which says it gives it the watermark. That basically means it's approved, which just means it's tested things like it's got power there. It means it's not going to have any issues with, electrocution. It means that it actually says, it does what it says. It's been properly tested. So that watermark is kind of your certification device. So that's why they stipulate it's got to be, certified system. And this is just what it looks like in close up, just the box of that system, the actual diverter itself. So it's got the power to supply to the pump. And that generally just have like an IP rated general purpose outlet. It can use single phase power, doesn't need any 3-phase or anything like that. So you need a general purpose outlet. You either need a new one installed outside, or if you can connect it internally. So you generally need, if you don't have a GPT outside, you need an electrician to install one or to work out where to connect to. And then it has basically the inlet where water's coming in from your laundry, which goes into the box. It has this manual valve in this one where you flip it, where it goes to sewer or not. So if this is closed, it goes into the box. When this is open, it goes straight out to sewer. When it goes into here, water will fill up, the pump will turn on, and it will send it out to the irrigation system in. And then this is just a picture taken with the lid off, looking into the system. And then you can see this mesh bag. So that mesh bag is there to capture the lint, the hairs, and any little bit of organics and debris. If it's the washing machine, you forget and you put the tissue through. All of those things. And it's generally a good idea, because if that goes directly out to your drip irrigation system, it can clog it pretty quickly. So the idea of that, and you kind of need to just monitor that as to how often you just basically pull that mesh bag out and you clean it. And so that's basically just a cleaning point as well. Pretty simple. You just clean it like you would any other mesh strainer. This is just a number of them. If you're really interested, this is the list. If you're interested, if you go to the Watermark site and look at it, there's a whole bunch of these systems. So you can have a look at this, and then if you search online, you'll start to see, these jumping out. There's certainly a number of systems that are more prominent in the market than others. So you have a look and have a look at, see, you can, if you have a look at a few of these, you'll see the ones that are generally more well constructed. Look at the pump type and the system of the pump, the box itself and how sturdy it looks. You can quickly kind of tell those that look, like the real deal system. If you get something that's approved, you're generally pretty good, but you can see that there's definitely systems that are better constructed than others. And so so the next step up I'm going to talk to is greywater treatment. And so greywater treatment is now, so before I go on to that, these diversion devices, these are the ones that you can't store water and you can't use it for anything but subsurface irrigation. And so now I'm going to talk to greywater treatment systems, which can be used internally, depending on what they're approved for, and they can be used for surface irrigation. But now we're jumping up in cost. The typical costs are at the very low end, 8,000–9,000, up to maybe 15,000, depending on how complicated your installation is. So you compared to a rainwater tank system, which would set you back maybe 5,000, these are more expensive than an equivalent rainwater tank scheme. So the greywater treatment systems, they must be approved. So unlike the greywater diversion devices, which they just need a watermark, greywater treatment systems must be approved by New South Wales Health. And that link, and I can share these slides, but if you search online, you'll see it straight away. But there's a list on New South Wales Health, and it tells you when their approvals expire. So these things are actually always changing depending on when they expire and whether the company's selling enough of these to make it worthwhile for them to update their approvals. And what they're good at is that they can actually store water. So now all of a sudden you can buffer those peaks. So we looked at that Canberra house. I showed you that they had a really high peak in one of the summers. So what a greywater treatment system, it would allow them to actually buffer that peak. They could store the water in a small tank. If they had a 2 kilolitre tank, they could actually buffer that out and then start to meet most of that irrigation demand by storing it in the spring months, for example. And so they can provide a really reliable source of water and a really high quality source of water. When you see the water coming out of a lot of these treatment systems, they're pretty much clear water. You can't really tell the difference from the really high end ones from that and potable water. They're quite a good quality treatment system. And they can be used for, each system has approvals for certain things. So the lower end, cheaper systems are only approved for toilet flushing and irrigation, surface irrigation, whereas the high end ones tend to be used for, can be approved for clothes washing as well. And as I mentioned, they can be used to store the treated greywater. So this is what I would call one of the lower end ones, just in the sense of the technology that it's there is pretty simple. If any of you have been involved in like a holiday house or a off the grid house in the countryside somewhere, they're kind of like the aerated water treatment systems, if you know those. They're basically they put the water in, water comes in, and then they bubble air up through it. And that air is there to basically oxygenate the water and help the aerobic decomposition of anything that gets in there. In greywater, there's not that much, so it doesn't need a lot of treatment. It just kind of polishes it a bit. And then it goes, and then it settles. Anything that's big enough to settle will settle in the bottom, so you get a bit of sludge accumulating. And then it goes into so this is the first tank. Water comes in here, the bubbles up. This bubbles up through here. That gets the aerobic decomposition of anything any organics going. And then once it spends a certain amount of time in there, it comes into this clean water tank, and then it can basically pump out to the. In this case, this is approved for irrigation and toilet flushing. I'm not sure if this one's approved for clothes washing. I don't think it is, but I'd have to check. And it also has a chlorine doser in there. So it just adds a little bit of chlorine, which helps with just controlling any pathogens in the water. So it just has automatic chlorine doser. And then this is what it looks like. This is the tank on the back of a truck before it's installed. So that there is the lid. That's the actual tank itself. And then this is what it looks like installed. So it basically goes in underground. You could probably install this above ground under the house or somewhere like that if you've got a lot of slope change, but generally they're installed in ground. But if you really wanted to, you probably could install this above ground. There's probably nothing really stopping you from doing that. But typically, yeah, they're installed like this. So there's that box there, is that box there, and that lid there is lid And then, yeah, it just pumps out to you. So you can connect this into a, that's the storage as well. It has a couple of kiloliters of storage in the whole system. And then basically this would just, whenever you get trigger for your irrigation system or your toilet flush, for example, it would call on this water and then it would just pump out water to that. So it's just connected into your household system. This is a really high-end system. These guys have been really used, particularly in yachts and things like that, or really particular systems. That's kind of where these systems have kind of made their market. But they can also be used in the residential market. They've installed them in apartment blocks where you've got maybe 10 to 15 residential apartments in a 2 or 3 story walk up. And what it is they're really compact. These systems are really compact, and they use this really high-end treatment system called a membrane filter. And what the membrane filter is it's basically like this. Really, it's a special plastic tube, spiral wound, and they've punctured these tiny little holes in it. And those little holes mean that you get really good filtration. So when Sydney Water do reuse of wastewater out in Rouse Hill, for example, they use membrane treatment to do the final polishing. What they've got a system that basically can do that with Greywater, because it's relatively good quality to start with, that goes into this membrane and then bubbles air through it as well to help the membrane work really well and to stop clogging of the membranes. And it can also backwash the membranes, and then it goes and it can treat it at a relatively high rate because this thing operates under pressure. And then basically this would go into, because you can see here it doesn't have much storage, you could then put this into a storage tank. But you're getting, again, this is the type of system, you're getting really good quality water. And then it's also got a little compact UV disinfection system as well. So it also disinfects the water here, that's the UV. The water comes in, goes into this system under pressure, and then goes out to through the UV, and then comes out, and then you would store that water. But yeah, these things aren't that big, they kind of sit on a wall. They're pretty compact for a single household. And then these are just a range of different approved systems, New South Wales at the moment. So you can have a look at those and the different systems if you're interested. And the GTS list, GTS just stands for Greywater Treatment System. There is one reed bed system if you're interested in a more natural treatment system. And I'll quickly fly through one that we've done on a workshop before, where a kind of do-it-yourself system. So you can do your own Greywater treatment system yourself. And this one is basically you put the Greywater in to the base of this, and then it slowly flows up through a pressure, just gravity pressure, and then gets collected at the top, and it flows through a media, and then at the top it just gets collected. And that system there is called Root Zone, and there's a supplier of that. And they basically, they take the Greywater in, and then out of that you get this treated water coming out. And they're also approved. So I'll just quickly talk to regulation. I've mentioned this before, but this is kind of just the summary of it. Diversion devices, it's got to be approved watermark device, got to be licensed plumber. It can't take kitchen or toilet water, as I mentioned, no storage. It's got to be delivered to a subsurface irrigation system, and it must have a switching device. And treatment systems require approval, plus all of those requirements above. It must be a licensed plumber, it can't take kitchen or toilet water, it can have storage, and it can be used for surface irrigation. So I'm just going to quickly talk about just an example of one that, if you're interested in doing something yourself, or interested in doing something that has more integration into the garden. This is a Greywater treatment system that we did. This was on a workshop where the guy who ran was volunteering for the workshop actually found a bathtub in a skip bin, and he went and commandeered that bathtub, and then we used that as basically the shell of the wetland. And what you can see here is this is the water, this is the pipeline for the water coming in from the in their case the shower, and then the water comes in down through here and into the bottom pipe, and then water basically, because it's under pressure there, flows up actually through a gravel, and I'll show you the gravel media, and then into this top pipe where it's collected, goes into here, and then it drops out, and it actually goes out through the bath plug. So I'll show you that. And then that's the water coming in. Water comes in here under pressure, it rises up to this top one, gets collected in the top one, drops into this point here, and then goes out through the bathtub. And then this is just the plumbing underneath. So when we actually looked at this plumbing, like that starts, this is why I was saying you need the licensed plumber. This is the water coming down from the bath. It had a U-turn. And then we just worked out, okay, actually then this has got the floor waste coming in through here. So we wanted to make sure we didn't get the floor waste. So the plumbing, and then it actually went out to sewer, and then connecting into that from the sewer was the toilet. So the plumbing quickly became quite complex. This is underneath their house in the actual, what the plumbing was doing actually underneath the house in their bathroom. So we needed to be quite careful that we actually tapped into the right system so that we didn't actually get, floor waste, toilet waste coming down into our Greywater wetland system. And that's why you need the licensed plumber. So when you actually do the diversions, they can quickly become quite complex trying to trace exactly what pipe is what. And then we've just worked out like all the different pieces of PVC pipe. We've got and so that's kind of what that is doing. I won't go into that into too much detail. There, if you're interested, we can talk about it more in questions. And this is what it looks like under the house. So this is, the bath coming down. This is the U-bend, and this is where we're tapping into it. So you've got all these pipes through here. And you need to make sure what all these, what all these pipes are that are going on underneath, and you're tapping into the right ones. And then this is just, working in these conditions underneath the house. Lots of fun. I'm trying to tap into that, and just getting all that PVC in there. It was definitely crawling room only. Then this is the pipeline. So then this pipeline comes out. The bath was actually just up here, right next to the hot water system. So it came out punching through the brick wall, through cavity in the wall, like one of these sections through there, and then basically burying this pipeline down through here. So the pipeline just ran down to the side of the house, coming down through here. The bathtub's just over off to the side over here. So we're just laying that out on the surface before we bury it underneath. And then just doing work to the bathtub to put it into a base so it's held up off the ground. And then you can see here, this is the water coming out. This is the treated water coming out of the base, and we're putting the subsurface and Aggie pipe coming out. So this is the treated water coming out into the subsoil drain and out through the garden and to the turf area. And so then that is us just scratching in. This is the garden. So they had veggies growing through here, as well as a bunch of different natives and non-natives plants through there. And so the Greywater just ran out all the way along through here in the backyard. And so we're just basically moving stuff out of the way there to scratch that in. And then you can see that's the pipe coming in and out through there. So that's the subsurface irrigation that we've just scratched in, just below the surface really. And we've just covered it in gravel just to help get the water out and to soak out into the garden. And then we've just got these T branches to get more water out into the garden. And so water will flow out through here. And all we've done to get the water out is we've just cut little slots into the pipe so that it basically flows out. And then at the very end, this is capped. And that's what water will flow all the way down to the end and preferentially flow out the bottom. And then it will, as it gets filled up through here, it'll back water up through here and start to flow out these other junctions. If you can install it flat, that's better. So you can then it won't preferentially flow down to the bottom first. It'll flow out equally everywhere. And then this is what it looks like on the finished. So this is the water coming down, coming into it. That's the pipe going out onto the bottom. And then everything's buried because we don't want anyone coming in contact with the Greywater in the treatment system. That all those pipe work that you saw before is all buried. And then this is just all planted out with gravel, which does the treatment with the plants in there. And that's the wetland on top. So what this looks like from the surface is just a finished, you could use coarse sand like in the root zone one, but in this one we've just used gravel. And then that's just, the Greywater is literally, if you scratched out that gravel, dug a little hole, the Greywater would just be sitting, the treated Greywater would just be sitting about 50 mils from the surface. So that's the general components of a Greywater system in that. So you see the diversion, the treatment system, or the diversion, and the subsoil irrigation. This is just some list of some different sources of information. These are the guidelines for Greywater reuse, New South Wales guidelines. They're fairly old, but they're still pretty relevant. And they talk about just all the things that you need to consider. I've kind of summarized most of those, but it's a good read in terms of just the key things you need to consider. New South Wales Health on the approved Greywater treatment systems and Watermark for the approved Greywater diversions. Irrigation Warehouse is quite good as an online retailer for products and give you a quick idea of prices. So they sell a whole bunch of different things, like plumbing bits and pieces. as well as some Greywater products, but not everything. There's a really oldie book that was probably published in the 1990s called Creating an Oasis with Greywater, that goes into lots of detail. It's like a 200-page book about all the things that you need to consider. So if you're really interested in that, you can go and have a look at that book. It's often in libraries. You'll see in public libraries, have a look at it. But it's a really great book. Really got lots of practical experience of installing it and the things that you need to consider. And just recently, a good one that WA at the moment, because it's in the middle of this kind of climate change situation where water demand is water into its dams is really changing. They've got rebates for greywater reuse. So they've actually put out a nice simple guide at the moment. So WA at the moment has some good information just around greywater reuse, just because they've got they've got drivers for it through rebates. So that's the end of what I've got prepared. So I might pause here and throw it open to questions.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that, David. That was a really fascinating presentation, and I'm quite interested in doing something similar like that at my place. I'm sure everyone else attending got some great, got a lot of information out of that. We got a lot of value out of your presentation as well. I think we have one question coming in from Deb. If I want more information on Blackwater and compostable toilets, where would you recommend she start? So this is about Blackwater and compostable toilets.
Yeah, so there's with Blackwater, there's particularly for single dwellings, there is guidelines around single dwellings. So interestingly, in some ways, there's a lot of guidance around wastewater devices. There's kind of, because lots of rural or unsewered properties have it. So there's a really good guideline from the old Sydney Catchment Authority, which is now Water New South Wales, around on-site wastewater. And I can add it to, I'll add it to this thing, I'll dig it out and send it through. It was done about 3 or 4 years ago. And it just talks about treatment, disposal, all those things. It's quite comprehensive. I'm not sure if the question was related to doing that in an urban context, like in a suburban context, like in in a residential area, or if that was more on an unsewered property. But the guideline that I'm thinking of is tailored more towards the unsewered property, so it doesn't really talk about all of the complexities and nuances of doing it in a suburban area where you've already got sewers, which is slightly different. So was the question related to doing it in an existing suburban area where you've got sewer?
I think it was about, Deb was thinking about more of a childcare service to meet the living building challenges.
Oh, yeah, okay, living building challenge, yeah, okay. Yes, interesting, living building challenge, yeah. So the living building challenge, which where we're currently working on an approach that's doing that now for development. I know in the living building challenge, they've got the stretch target of reusing all of the on-site wastewater. We've been talking to them about that and just the practicalities of doing that, and particularly because for the living building challenge they want 100% reuse of wastewater, and in a suburban area that's actually really challenging from a regulation and health point of view, because you can't, it's very difficult to reuse all of your wastewater like the living building challenge suggests in a suburban area, because you need to reuse all of it. You need large disposal areas, which means you need large areas of garden, because you can't reuse all of the wastewater internally. Typically, there's just not enough demand. And if you don't have irrigation to dispose of it, it becomes difficult. But there are a bunch of treatment systems, wastewater treatment systems that are there, and I'll send you a link to a guideline that it's oldish now, but the old Landcom put together a good guideline on a bunch of different treatment systems, and published information. They got a whole bunch of information around that, so I'll send that through. I'll add this to this bunch of information that talks about that. Yeah, what we've experienced with the living building challenge is they actually just specifically on the living building challenge, they actually acknowledge that in some areas you can actually meet that intent of that component of the Living Building Challenge without actually reusing all of the 100% wastewater. So just be aware of that. You don't necessarily have to use all of the 100% wastewater in certain circumstances of the Living Building Challenge.
Great, thank you very much for that, David. That's a pretty good answer for that one as well, actually. And Deb says that thank you as well. Okay, we have another question here. If there is a proper treatment, can grey water be used for other applications such as firefighting or indoor and outdoor cleaning?
Yeah, good question. So the approvals don't specifically talk to indoor, outdoor cleaning or fire cleaning. But if you're using a high-end system, there's no reason for indoor, outdoor cleaning. Particularly, again, it comes back to common sense in many ways. If you're using it in a way where you're minimizing, generally if you're minimizing contact with that, it's generally fine. Firefighting is an interesting one because obviously you generate lots of aerosols and there's lots of water spraying around with firefighting. And so we've had instances where particularly with the rural fire services, fireys, etc., there's been a lot of concerns about reusing treated water on those. So my experience with those using on kind of a different system, stormwater harvesting system, things like that, there has been a lot of resistance to using recycled water because of the potential health implications and the amount of aerosols that are generated. Having said that, there is nothing from a water quality point of view, particularly for the higher end treatment systems, that it wouldn't be able to meet the water quality requirements. It's a lot of it is perception. So yeah, so there's no formal guidance around whether it's accepted for those things. So yeah, it comes back to common sense.
I might chime in on that question as well. Now, I think if there could be a way of using it, so if it's treated to a high enough standard, I take it from what you presented, David, that it can be stored in maybe a dedicated firefighting tank, water tank. And if that tank is connected to, say, a sprinkler system, which is designed to just maybe sprinkle the water around the house when no one's present. For example, if there's no firefighters on site and you're not there to fight the fire, in fact, you've done the smart thing and leave the house and let the sprinkler system defend the house for you. If there's no one around, well, then I suppose in that scenario, there's minimal contact with any reused water or treated water. So that's any concerns about safety is. Okay, and just one other thing about firefighting, I did actually ask a gentleman by the name of Justin Leonard. He's a researcher in bushfires from CSIRO about whether or not grey water can be used to irrigate, say, the landscape, meaning your backyard, if you're on the bushfire interface, and if by hydrating your landscape, you could actually reduce the risk of say a bushfire to your property. And the response I got back from Justin was that yes, indeed, it can work towards sort of lowering your risk. It won't eliminate it. It will lower the risk by making sure all the plants and vegetation around your house are well hydrated and full of water, so they're less combustible and can form and as well, along with your garden being well landscaped. Of course, you can't just have bushes everywhere. If your land is properly landscaped for bushfire, having a plentiful supply of water to irrigate your plants and trees would, again, help reduce your risk to bushfire. Of course, the only caveat to that is that you need to make sure you have the appropriate planting, because I believe, and David, you could talk to this point a bit more, some native plants might not necessarily appreciate grey water as much as maybe European or introduced species.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's right. So generally grey water tends to be low in phosphorus and nitrogen, which is a lot of natives. So grevilleas are notorious for not liking, they're very sensitive to nutrients. So some plants in particular are really, really sensitive. And you can see that if you go to a nursery and they have, often little tags on them now saying we are sensitive to phosphorus or particular nutrients. And yeah, the classic is definitely grevilleas. Like, you know, I've killed quite a few grevilleas in my time for that reason, just by putting too much water, even just from the bark on them. So yeah, definitely some natives are, but most natives, you know, apart from those really sensitive ones, most natives are pretty good. For Greywater, particularly because it's not Greywater, as you can imagine, you know, if you're just having a shower like this, it's only what's in the soap or the shampoo that you're introducing any type of nutrients into it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that, David. That's a good one as
Yeah.
well. Okay, does
Yeah,
anyone else have any other questions? Sorry, David, you say something?
Yeah, I totally agree around keeping, you know, the ability to keep things hydrated and the ability for Greywater to be used for that. I think that's a really good point.
And especially considering the Black Summer bushfires, where where those fires happened on the back of a pretty severe drought, where Sydney was under some pretty serious water restrictions, and Warragamba Dam was down to like 40%. Using your Greywater to irrigate your landscape, especially if you live in the Ku-ring-gai area, which Ku-ring-gai is the third most bushfire at risk suburb or LGA in New South Wales. Because we have up to 17,000 properties on the bushland urban interface that's mapped as bushfire prone land. So there's an awful lot of backyards that are sort of at risk from bushfire, a lot of houses that are at risk from bushfire. So a well thought out and well implemented greywater system could go a long way to actually reducing the risk to bushfire. And so something worth thinking about. Okay, so does anyone else have any other questions to ask David? Okay. Okay, so nothing else coming through. So what I'll do is I'll just wrap up the workshop by saying thank you, David, again, for a fascinating presentation. And again, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's attended for coming along to tonight's presentation. This presentation has been recorded and will be placed on Council's YouTube channel, and will be available to watch again in case there's any information you'd like to get. Also, regarding the Greywater using Greywater at home, as everyone might be aware, we do have a Water Smart rebate program where you can get rebates for rainwater tanks, rainscaping, and rain gardens. We'll be introducing rebates for Greywater reuse sometime in the future. So as attendees to the workshop, you'll be the first to know when the rebates are available. Also, following on to that, I'd like to also mention that we have rebates for bushfire and retrofits. So if you happen to live on bushfire-prone land, or if you're in the Ember attack zone, you can get rebates worth up to $1,500 to improve your house and make it more resilient to Ember attack or bushfire attack. The rebates are worth, I think I already mentioned, $1,500. And I can post up links to the rebate program in the chat. If I haven't done so already, I'll do it now. Yep. We also have some more other events which everyone might be interested in attending. We have a solar for strata presentation on the 25th of May, starting at 6:30. We have a birdwalk series, the Cascade Tracks, on the 3rd of June this year, on the 3rd of June at 8:30 a.m. We have a Living Simply workshop, green cleaning, on the 8th of June this year, and that's on at 6:30 p.m. So to book into these events, you can go to the What's On part of the Ku-ring-gai Council's website to find these events and book into them. And the last thing I'd like to mention is that Ku-ring-gai has adopted a zero emissions policy by 2040. And to help achieve this goal, Ku-ring-gai has launched the Net Zero Community Program. So our success in cutting council's emissions through energy efficiency and renewable energy has been an important step. And now we want to work with our residents, schools, businesses, to help a whole community reach that goal. We want to address these problems locally and build healthy, resilient communities. But we can't do that without you. So we want to know from the community, is it innovative waste solutions, smarter transport, financial incentives? What will help us achieve net zero? So please tell us what matters to you and how we can help you create a livable Ku-ring-gai by completing an online survey. So the link to the survey I've already posted into the chat box there, along with links to the different rebates we have available and the dates for the various events I've just mentioned as well. So, and that's it. I'd like to bring a close to the workshop. And if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to send those questions to me via the emails that you received as part of this workshop. And or you can email them to sustainability@kmc.newsouthwales.gov.au. So again, I'd like to say thank you very much, David, for the workshop. That was fantastic. And I hope to see you all soon. All the best. All right. Thank you. Bye.